There's this quick check right off the highway, not too far from my place. It's the only place that stays open 24/7 in my podunk town. It's about a 25-minute drive if I'm pushing it, which, let's be honest, I usually am. So, for you city folks, that's basically next door. My sleep schedule is a disaster, so I've been to that quick check more times than I can count. I like to think I'm pretty average looking, nothing special, so I blend in, but I wouldn't be surprised if the late night crew recognizes me by now. This all went down last week, so the details are still super clear in my head. It was after midnight, and I was coding away on my laptop. My brain works best between 9 p.m. and 3 a.m. So, I was in that zone, you know, that sweet spot every worker craves. The thing about grinding late at night is that you go from totally fine to starving in like 5 minutes. That's exactly what made me shut down and grab some grub around a very reasonable 2 a.m. To give you the full picture, the highway leading to the quick check is more of a back road than an interstate, so it's usually pretty empty. The drive there was pretty normal. I pulled into the quick check, ordered a sandwich from the counter, and started wandering the aisles while I waited. The mix of caffeine I'm usually loaded up on, and the ADHD I have makes it hard for me to stand still. So, I was just pacing around one of the corners of the store when I saw something weird. Facing one of the refrigerators along the back wall was a guy sitting crisscross applesauce on the floor. It was such a bizarre sight that I almost missed it at first. Then I whipped my head back to make sure I wasn't imagining things. And nope, I wasn't. There was a dude just chilling on the floor at the end of the aisle, staring at the refrigerator like he was studying it. All I could see was his brown coat and jeans. I had to get a better look at this guy, at least his face. So, I walked down a few aisles. My plan was to quickly turn the corner, get a good look at him, then go back up one of the aisles, hopefully before he noticed me spying. Staring at strangers like that is obviously rude, so I didn't want him to catch me doing it. I was trying to be discreet, or at least look like I was browsing the snacks, but I guess I didn't do a great job because as soon as I turned the corner to look at him, he snapped his head around and stared right back at me. His movement was so sudden that I froze for a second, completely blanking on what I was even doing there. And let me tell you, one look at this guy told me he was anything but normal. Forget about sitting on the ground and staring at the refrigerator. This dude was definitely on something. I could tell from his eyes, which were super wide, and the way his lip was shaking. Like it was shivering, almost like he was cold, but it was actually kind of warm in there. And he was wearing a jacket too. His posture was all messed up, like he was straining instead of sitting, if that makes sense. But the worst part was the look he was giving me. He wasn't smiling and he wasn't frowning either. He was just staring blankly at me with this dead look that made it seem like he was already gone. The whole thing was creepy as hell. After staring at each other for way too long, I finally looked away and headed up one of the aisles, ready to get my food and get out of there. It wasn't ready yet, though. I stood at the counter and waited. The anxiety was getting to me, so I turned to face the corner of the store where the guy had been sitting. I was half expecting him to pop out of one of the aisles, and I have no idea what I would have done if he had, but he never did. Eventually, my food was ready. I grabbed it and left without another thought. I thought that was it. But as I was turning to get back on the highway, I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I glanced back towards the store and saw someone running full speed from the store entrance to the far end of the parking lot. I was already halfway onto the highway at that point, but as soon as I saw what looked like a brown coat, I knew it was him. As I drove past the quick check, I looked over one last time and saw that guy jumping into a truck. I didn't even want to think about what a guy like that could be rushing to do at 2 a.m. I was just glad I had nothing to do with it. I sped off, just wanting to get home in peace. After a few minutes, the last of the bright store lights disappeared behind me, and I was driving through the middle of nowhere again. I'm used to being the only car on the road that late, which is why I was surprised when I saw headlights in my rearview mirror. But it was even more surprising when I realized the headlights were getting closer, meaning they were going faster than me, and I was already pushing it. My first thought was that I was about to get pulled over, so I slowed down a little. The headlights kept coming, and I knew what was about to happen. Police lights were about to start flashing, and my night was about to be ruined. But when the car finally got close, I realized it wasn't a cop. It was that guy. That guy from the quick check. It was the same truck from the parking lot. I've never been so sure of anything in my life. I slammed my foot back on the gas and sped up again. The guy behind me started flashing his lights and honking, and I didn't know what to do. Should I try to outrun him or pull over and hope he'd keep going? I was in a sedan and he was driving a pickup truck, so I figured I could outrun him. The faster I went, though, the more freaked out I got. It was pure terror, like I was about to die. By the time I was going 100 mph, a voice in my head was screaming that I was going to die if I kept going. I swerved into the right lane, hoping he'd blow past me, but instead he swerved to stay behind me. I started slowing down to pull over on the shoulder, but the second I took my foot off the gas, the truck slammed into me. I grabbed the wheel to keep the car from spinning out and realized I was in a life or death situation. This guy was trying to kill me. Everything was happening so fast I couldn't think. I knew he was going to hit me again, and at that speed I'd be lucky not to crash. I don't know if it was the fear or my survival instincts kicking in. But the moment I saw him coming, I swerved to the left and slammed on the brakes. The truck flew past me, swerved back and forth a few times, and then spun out and crashed into the field. Even though my hands were shaking and I was terrified, I forced myself to start driving again. I sped all the way home. As soon as I got inside, I called the police and told them what happened. I didn't know exactly where it had happened, but I gave them my statement anyway. I know that Quick Check has security cameras in the parking lot, so I'm pretty sure they'll catch that guy. It's only been a week, but I haven't heard anything yet. My car isn't too beat up, but I still need to get it fixed. As for why that guy was after me, your guess is as good as mine. I just hope I never see him again. This happened in the summer of 2022. I was 25 and working what you could call a weird delivery job. I was hauling refurbished electronics and custom PC parts for this startup that was trying to compete with Amazon in small rural markets. The routes were long and completely random. Sometimes I'd be driving for 12 hours straight, often at night, going to these remote parts of the Southwest that most delivery companies wouldn't touch. The pay was good enough to make it worth it, and I didn't mind the driving since I grew up taking road trips. This particular night, I was on the last leg of a Phoenix to Lovington run. It was around 1 in the morning and I was driving through this empty stretch of Route 82 past the edge of Lincoln National Forest in southern New Mexico. If you've never driven through that area at night, it's hard to explain how isolated it feels. The road is narrow and not well lit. You might see another car every 20 or 30 minutes if you're lucky. The thing about that road is that it's the only way through that area for miles. The other routes would add like 2 hours to the trip, so if you need to get from point A to point B in that part of New Mexico, you pretty much have to take Route 82. Anyway, I was listening to a true crime podcast when I came around a bend and saw a red hatchback parked awkwardly on the gravel shoulder with its hazard lights flashing. I slowed down a bit out of habit. As I got closer, my headlights lit up a woman standing next to the car. She was holding her phone up in the air like she was trying to get a signal. My first thought was to just keep driving. I'm not heartless, but I'm also not dumb about the kinds of situations you can get into in that part of the state at that time of night. But then I started thinking about my own girlfriend, or my sister, and how I would want someone to stop if they were stranded in the middle of nowhere. Plus, I wasn't completely helpless. I had a Glock 43 under my steering column. I didn't exactly ask permission from the company to carry, but given some of the places we delivered to, it seemed like common sense. I slowed down and opened the passenger window a crack. The woman, who looked about my age, ran over and tried my passenger door handle, which was locked. She said she needed a ride to the nearest gas station and said her car had died and she couldn't get anyone on the phone. Her voice sounded nervous, like she was really stressed or maybe high. I hesitated for a second. The situation felt a little weird, but what made me decide to help was knowing I had a gun. I figured if things got bad, I could handle it. So I unlocked the door. She got in quickly and gave me a mumbled, "Thank you so much," without really looking at me. The way she mumbled made me think she was drunk or tipsy, which made me a little worried. Before driving, I asked her some questions. Had she hit something or did the engine just stop? But she kept avoiding the questions, just asking me to drive. Nothing she said made much sense, and I was thinking about kicking her out the more she talked. I was about to decide when I glanced over at her car one more time. To my surprise, a man stepped out from behind it like he had been hiding there. The adrenaline started pumping and I turned forward. There was another person standing in the road about 50 feet in front of us. He had something long in his hands, maybe a bat or a pipe. I couldn't tell. He started walking toward my car, and that's when my survival instinct took over. I floored it. I didn't even try to be careful. The woman turned to look back and started yelling. Then she reached down and started digging around in her purse for something. I had a feeling I knew what she was looking for. So, before things could get worse, I yelled at her to freeze and pulled out my gun. I didn't point it at her, but I rested it on the steering wheel so she could see it. Whatever she had been reaching for, she stopped. To my surprise, she stopped talking too. She just stared straight ahead with this blank look. Luckily, we were less than 30 minutes from Artesia. After a tense half hour, I pulled into a gas station. There were 2 other trucks in the lot. I told her to get out. She refused at first and gave me some dumb reason I can't remember. But I reached over her, yanked the passenger door open, and basically pushed her out of the truck. She stumbled back and fell on the ground, yelling something I couldn't understand. Someone started running over, probably one of the truck drivers, and I could already picture the accusations. All he saw was me throwing a woman out of the car, and I didn't want to deal with it for another second. So, I didn't. I yelled out a warning to him about her bad intentions, but that was all I was going to do. Then, I sped out of the lot before he could get to me and didn't look back. I drove to another gas station and started filling my tank. Then, I went to the passenger side to check the seat. Buried between the seat cushions was a burner phone battery and a sealed pack of zip ties. I didn't even want to think about it. I threw everything in the trash and got back on the road, ready to be done with the trip. I never reported it. Not to the police, and definitely not to my company. Not because I didn't think it was worth reporting, but because I didn't want to explain to a bunch of cops why I was driving around armed or why I had physically removed someone from my car. I'm not going to get into it, but you can figure that one out. One thing's for sure, though. Being armed that night might have saved my life. This happened about 3 years ago when my husband and I were driving cross-country from Utah to Georgia. We took a route that wasn't the fastest because it went through some places my husband wanted to see. The problem was that we drove through some pretty empty stretches of highway. The worst part was this section of western Kansas on US Route 400, basically 100 miles of nothing but farmland. We'd been driving all day and I fell asleep in the passenger seat around sunset. I can sleep anywhere in a moving car, so I was out for a few hours. Around 10 at night, I woke up when the car slowed down and realized my husband had pulled into this tiny gas station off the side of the highway. My husband said he was going to get some snacks and fill up the tank. I figured it was my last chance to use a real bathroom for a while, so I got out and went inside. I didn't take my phone or purse with me. I was just going to be in and out, so I didn't think I needed them. The cashier was an older guy who didn't even look up when I walked in. The bathrooms were in a narrow hallway toward the back of the store. As I opened the women's room door, I almost ran into a woman coming out of one of the stalls. That wouldn't have been a big deal except for how she looked. She had messy, dirty gray hair that looked kind of gross and sticky. She was wearing foam flip-flops that made a soft slapping sound when she walked. If that wasn't weird enough, she was wearing a thick purple and green coat. Keep in mind, this was Kansas in the middle of summer, and it was probably 80 degrees out. She was carrying a tied-up plastic grocery bag, and when she saw me, she just stared. Not like a normal, excuse me look, but a locked-on stare that felt strange, like she was waiting for me to say or do something. I didn't know what I was supposed to do, so I nodded and tried to walk around her, but she didn't move out of the way. I thought that was the end of it, that she'd leave. But instead of leaving, the woman turned around to follow me and walked toward the sink. But she didn't turn on the water or look in the mirror or do anything you normally do at a sink. She just stood there with her arms at her sides like she was waiting for me to do something again. I was already uneasy, so I went into the nearest stall and locked it. The second I sat down, I realized I should have brought my phone. I had no way to text my husband if something happened, and I was starting to think something was wrong with this woman. I sat there for a few minutes, just waiting for her to leave. I heard the soft slap of her flip-flops going toward the door, then the sound of the bathroom door opening and slamming shut. I waited to make sure she was gone, and then I realized something. I could still hear breathing. Not my own. Someone else's coming from somewhere in the bathroom. I realized she had faked leaving. She must have opened and slammed the door to make it sound like she left, but she was still in there. standing silently somewhere near the exit, probably in the corner by the door, just out of my sight. I didn't move. I sat in complete silence for a long time, trying to be quiet because I was scared of her hearing me. The whole time I kept thinking about how dumb I was for not bringing my phone. Finally, the door opened and closed again. The breathing stopped too, which made me feel better. I still wasn't sure, so I waited for another half-minute. Just as I was about to unlock the stall, I heard a gasp like someone had been holding their breath, followed by the bathroom door opening and closing again. That's when I really started freaking out. That woman had pretended to leave the bathroom twice. I had no idea what she wanted, but the fact that she was playing these games with me meant that whatever it wasn't good. I didn't know what to do. Part of me thought she was gone, but if she had pretended to leave twice, it wasn't crazy to think she had done it a third time. Finally, I couldn't take it anymore. I unlocked the stall as quietly as I could and stepped out, expecting to see her standing there, but the bathroom was empty. I washed my hands and left the bathroom. I had no idea where the woman had gone or if she was waiting for me somewhere else in the store. When I got back to the main part of the store, there was a large man checking out. I stood by one of the racks near the front until he finished and left. Then I used him as cover to leave the store. I thought if the woman was waiting outside, at least there would be another person around. Part of me thought I was being paranoid, but that changed the moment I stepped outside. As soon as I left the store, I saw her again. She was standing off to the side of the front entrance, clearly glaring at me. She was holding something in her hand that I couldn't see clearly. It looked like a knife, but I wasn't sure. The way she was holding it, though, and the way she was crouched, like she was about to pounce, made it seem like she was going to attack me. I got ready to scream or run or even fight. But instead of coming toward me, the woman turned and walked around the side of the building toward the back. I ran to our car and got in as fast as I could. My husband looked confused and asked what had taken me so long. I told him I'd explain when we were back on the road. He didn't question me and just drove off. As we were leaving, I looked back and saw the woman standing at the edge of the building watching our car. I don't know why, but seeing her made me so uncomfortable. I told my husband everything and he got mad at me for not bringing my phone. It was reasonable to call him for help. That was the end of that though, and we both agreed to try and forget the whole ordeal and get back to having a good time. I will say this, I don't use roadside restrooms anymore, and I'm absolutely not upset about it in the slightest. This incident happened to me back in 2020. I was 24 years old at the time, and I was working for a small logistics company. My job involved delivering automotive parts between different cities in the Midwest. Most of the time, it was an easy job. Long drives, decent pay, and nobody constantly looking over my shoulder. But that job is also the reason why I will never stop at a highway rest area after dark ever again. It was mid-January, bitterly cold, the kind of night where even the dashboard lights feel too bright and intrusive. I was driving along I-80, heading east from Des Moines, on my way to deliver a package to Davenport. The drive was going to take about 3.5 hours. I had left around 8 p.m., and by 10:30 p.m. I was in the middle of nowhere. All I could hear was the sound of the tires on the asphalt and the occasional semi-truck roaring by in the opposite lane. Around that time, I started to get really drowsy. My eyelids felt incredibly heavy, and I could feel myself zoning out, losing focus on the road. I spotted one of those blue rest area signs and decided to pull off for a few minutes to stretch my legs and grab a drink from the vending machine. The rest stop looked completely deserted. There were a few dim street lights, a small brick building housing the restrooms, and about a dozen parking spaces. There was only one other vehicle there, an old beat-up white van parked way off at the far end of the lot. Its lights were off. I parked under one of the lights, locked the truck, and went inside. The men's room smelled faintly of cleaning solution and mildew. The heater was making a weird, unsettling, rattling noise. I splashed cold water on my face to try and wake myself up. And when I looked up into the mirror, I thought I heard the door open behind me. I quickly turned around, but no one was there. I stood still for a second, just listening intently, but there was nothing but the hum of the heater. I figured it was just the wind playing tricks and finished up quickly. When I stepped outside, I noticed something that made me freeze in my tracks. The white van's headlights were now on. The engine wasn't running, but the lights were definitely on. I didn't remember hearing it start up. I immediately got this really bad feeling, a knot of dread forming in my stomach. I unlocked my truck as fast as I could, climbed inside, and started the engine. I pulled out of the parking space and headed toward the exit. As I did, the van's lights suddenly shut off again. I remember thinking that maybe someone was sleeping in there and had just accidentally bumped the lights on. But as I got back on the highway, I couldn't shake the feeling, and I kept checking my mirrors constantly. For about 5 minutes, nothing happened. Then in the distance behind me, I saw headlights. 2 small dots getting closer and closer. It was the van. At first I wasn't completely sure, but as it got closer, I could see that it was the same boxy, unremarkable white van. No company logo, no side windows, just a plain, dirty cargo van. It caught up to me incredibly fast and got right on my tail. I was already going about 75 miles per hour, but the van stayed mere inches behind my bumper, practically glued to me. Then it suddenly switched lanes, sped up beside me, and matched my speed. The driver rolled down his window about halfway. I could barely make out his face, just a dark shadow and maybe the outline of a baseball cap. He motioned for me to roll my window down, but I absolutely refused. He kept gesturing wildly and then pointed at the bed of my truck, like he was trying to tell me that something was wrong back there. At first, I hesitated. Maybe one of my straps had come loose, or something had fallen out of the truck. But then I noticed something that didn't make any sense at all. There was absolutely nothing in the bed of the truck. It was completely empty. That's when I realized that he wasn't trying to warn me about anything. This was something else entirely. I kept driving, pretending not to notice him, but he started honking his horn and drifting closer and closer to my lane, trying to force me over. I swerved slightly to keep some distance between us, and he sped ahead, cutting sharply in front of me. For a split second I thought he was going to slam on the brakes, but then, without any warning, he veered onto the shoulder of the road and came to a complete stop. I flew past him, my heart pounding in my chest like a drum solo. I stayed in the fast lane, going nearly 90 miles per hour now, just trying to get as far away from him as possible. A few seconds later, I checked my mirror again. The van was back on the road. It followed me for another 20 miles or so. Sometimes it would fade back until I could barely see its lights. Then, out of nowhere, it would suddenly speed up again and reappear right behind me, tailgating me aggressively. I decided that I needed to stop somewhere public, somewhere with other people around. The next sign indicated that there was a truck stop 5 miles ahead. I took that exit as quickly as I could, pulled into the truck stop lot, and parked right under a bright light near the diesel pumps. There were a few semi-trucks lined up, and I could see a few drivers inside through the windows of the diner next door. The van didn't pull in immediately. I waited maybe 2 agonizing minutes. Then, it came slowly up the ramp and into the lot. I quickly got out of my truck and headed straight into the diner, seeking safety in numbers. As soon as I walked in, the bell above the door jingled, and the woman behind the counter looked up. She was probably in her 50s. I told her that a van had been following me for the last half hour, and she must have seen how visibly shaken I was because she immediately called over the trucker who was sitting at the counter. This guy stood up. He was a huge, imposing man, wearing a flannel shirt and sporting a gray beard. He walked outside with me, and the second we stepped out, we saw the van idling at the far end of the lot, just sitting there facing my truck. The trucker muttered something under his breath like, "Yeah, that ain't good," and told me to go back inside the diner. He walked directly toward the van, approaching it confidently. I couldn't hear what he said to them, but a few seconds later, the van suddenly reversed direction, swung around in a wide arc, and peeled out of the lot, heading back toward the highway. The trucker came back, shaking his head in disbelief. He said that there were 2 guys inside, both wearing hoodies, both just staring straight ahead, not saying a single word. I stayed in that diner for almost an hour until I was absolutely sure that they were gone for good. I finished the rest of my drive with my eyes glued to the rearview mirror, constantly scanning for any sign of the white van. When I finally got back to Davenport, I parked under the brightest lights I could find near the hotel and thoroughly checked my truck. Everything seemed to be fine, but there were 2 smudges on the tailgate, like someone had tried to open it with dirty hands. I quit that job a few months later, unable to shake the feeling of unease. Now, every time I drive long distances, I make sure to fill up my gas tank before dark, bring plenty of snacks, and I don't stop unless it's somewhere crowded and open 24 hours a day. Because I know for a fact that if I had rolled down that window or pulled over when they told me to, I wouldn't be here today telling this story.